Hello and welcome. We're going to start our webinar now. Today, our webinar is on apps retention, benchmarks, strategies, and best practices. I'm Ankita Kaushik, a content marketing manager at MoEngage and your host for this webinar. We have an insightful webinar with two excellent speakers lined up for you all today. This is a collaborative effort between AppsFlyer and MoEngage. Now, let me introduce our speakers. First up is Himanshu Dilip Kulkarni. Himanshu is the Director of Sales India at AppsFlyer. With extensive experience in B2B sales across sectors, Himanshu is reputable for converting white spaces into sustainable revenue models across several geographies. At AppsFlyer, Himanshu's focus is on strategically expanding AppsFlyer's footprint and strengthening current relationship with clients in India. Hi, Himanshu. Thanks for joining us today. Our next speaker is Ashwin S.L. Ashwin heads the marketing division at MoEngage and has been overseeing all marketing activities for the brand, including field marketing, community building, product marketing, and sales enablement. Ashwin's prior sales experience gives him a deep understanding of how sales and marketing should be aligned to deliver maximum results for a brand such as MoEngage. Hi, Ashwin, and thanks for joining us today. Now, before we begin this webinar, let's do a quick technical check and go through some ground rules. If you can hear me, please click on the raise hand option that is on the right hand side of your screen. Cool, looks like we are good to go. This is a live webinar and we'll be discussing how you can improve your app retention numbers. Please remember, we have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, so feel free to key in your questions via the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will get the answers for the same to you. Another important message to all our attendees, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar and slides subsequently right after this webinar. So now let's begin the webinar. Over to you, Himanshu.
Thank you, Ankita. Hi, everyone. Happy to have you. So before we begin, let me give you a quick brief about AppsFlyer, what we do, and why we see retention from a different lens. We at AppsFlyer are obsessed with data cleanliness, data integrity, data actionability. It is important as a measurement partner that we see data with clean and unbiased lens. And that is what we do. We are fully unbiased, backed by companies like Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Telekom, Magma, Pitango, and Comra. This also gives us a benefit to work with various different advertisers all across the globe, helping them to achieve their goals and also enriching their data to get most informative information through it. At AppsFlyer, and as an industry standard, we look into 1 terabyte of monthly data points, and we touch base approximately 8.4 billion devices. This allows us to understand the users, the clients, the advertisers, and the publishers with in-depth knowledge, and also understand that what is powering them. Our scale powers everything we do, improving our fingerprints, our anti-fraud solution, and expand our customer feedback loop, leading us to help various advertisers globally to get insightful understanding of the user and use it for various purposes, including improving ROI and retention. This gives us an opportunity to speak about retention in general, which I'm going to share some thoughts today. But before I start, let me speak something more about retention. Many brand places far more emphasis on new customer acquisition than on customer retention. This cartoon holds true in most of the organization where everybody has been running around to get new users. It has been proved statistically that 5% increase in customer retention can actually increase your company's profitability by 75%. When we say this, one has to actually understand that retention is key metrics, and market has shifted the focus away from acquisition to retention. And it is time for everybody to focus on retention. According to eMarketer's survey, about 21% abandon the app after first use. What does it mean? It means that 21% of your ad spends or the users which you might have acquired is no longer with you. The question comes, why and what? What went wrong over here? Let me address it. To answer this, the first thing which needs to be corrected is the user acquisition. If something goes wrong in user acquisition, you are not going to retain your clients. The user acquisition is the most important and critical aspect. To put it simple, if you acquire a user who does not have your product requirement, it will lead to a churn no matter what you do. Think like this. If suppose you are running a hyper local app and you are running a user acquisition campaign, acquiring user all over India, say pan India, the problem is people will download your app. They will understand that it is at unserviceable location. They will churn out. And tomorrow when you start serving there, they will still not try your app. So one has to be very careful in getting the funnel right. This is the first step which has to go right. Rapid user growth followed by rapid user attrition is an indicator of unsustainable growth, which means it is not only important, but it is a necessity that you have a good balance, you target well, you have your campaign set up in a way that the user acquisition and the people who are coming into your funnel are the rightful user of your product. Strong retention of users over time is good indicator of product and market fit, which we all know. Now the question comes that, okay, great. Now I have acquired the right user. How do I retain it? Or what does it take to retain it? Users try out a lot of apps, but decide which one they want to stop using within first 3 to 7 days. For a decent app, the majority of users retain for 7 days, stick around much longer. The key success is to get the users hooked during the critical first 3 to 7 days. People in general have tried various methods to retain user. I'm sure all of us must have used and experienced travel category, specifically having a closed wallet wherein they reward you or they give you a cash back every time you do the booking. But that money or the cash back can only be used within that closed ecosystem. Similarly, sometimes in gaming industry specifically, people try to retain by giving a lot of incentives. May not be in the form of real money, but it could be in form of say coins or some kind of a special power so that people keep on engaging with the app over a period of time. So what should we do to retain our customers? Let me try to explain few pointers around it. Let's go to the basics. And this is quite important. Usually, whenever install happens, people think the work is done. The actual work starts after that. Install is just the first step. Go beyond. Look for what happens post-install. How do we do that? I'll speak about it in the following slide. An install usually used to be a KPI when people used to go for a land grab mode, when they just wanted to have the users and then wanted to figure out what they want to do about it. But that's not the case anymore. The actual game starts once you have got the right user. You need to measure and attribute correctly. If the LTV, that is lifetime value, is not stitched back to the main source, you will lose on scaling up and retaining efficiently. Think about it. You got a user from a network A. You're very happy you got it at a very cost effective way and running your campaigns. But those users over a period of time are not functioning the way you want. For e-commerce, they are not buying. For, say, travel, they are not even searching for any of the flights or hotels. Is it a good user or bad user? You will only get to know when you are looking beyond install. So it's absolutely critical. So what you need to do, you need to define various kinds of events. And when we say events, it's no longer a phenomena of just defining an event. You need a rich in-app event. The deeper you go, the more insights you can gather about your user acquisition and re-engagement channels, your creatives and your users, and how they behave on a granular segment and level is what is important for you to understand. Let me explain you what I mean by rich in-app events. Look at this. A simple add to cart is an event. But when we enrich it with various attributes, you get a lot of understanding about the user. For example, say content type, content ID, price, currency, customer user ID, date, and whatever attributes you can get for that user will help you create segments which can be used efficiently, which I'll speak in some time. There's also one important aspect which I would like to share upon is a critical event. We have various events, and then we have an event which defines your ROAS or ROI. But before having a major event, there are few events which actually can be an indicator which will lead to that particular ROI or ROAS dependent event. Let me explain you. An event which is a main indicator, as I said, could be an add to cart, down the stream funnel, or purchase. Before that, actually, somebody will go and probably search for some products or will try to leverage and unlock few of the levels in gaming or has finished some tutorials. So those are known as critical events. And now systems have been very smart. You can optimize on these critical events. You can get a lot of data around these critical events. Your BI team, your product team should be able to define this efficiently and you'll be able to use it. One of the examples which I want to quote over here is from Badoo. Badoo is one of the largest dating app with over 360 million users, 40,000 registrations per day. At AppsFlyer, we have a board which we call it MAMA board, that is Mobile Attribution and Marketing Analytics board, wherein digital marketeers come and speak about how they have been optimizing and achieving their goals. The reason I want to talk about this over here is how complex events optimization can boost your retention and ROI. And I'm sure your actual goal is not only retention, but to improve the ROI. The main goal of Baidu was the same, retention and revenue. They also realized, like most of us, there's a huge spend which happens on Facebook and Google. And Facebook and Google both usually optimize on one single event. So what's the solution? Technically, there are three challenges. The first, if you have to optimize for somebody which is going to give you a return after 7 days or after 30 days or after say 45 days, completion of, in gaming specifically, completion of various levels, and then they start purchasing, it is too late for you to really react or act onto it. So time is in essence. You need to wait about a week to understand the user. That's too long. Second is inaccuracy. If you gather too many data points, you don't know what to make and which one to optimize for. And some events can too soon, say like for example, registration. It's like at the very beginning of the funnel. Now that might not be the indicator. But imagine if you are able to club a couple of events, say registration plus level achieved plus add to cart, some tutorials finished and came in, you can come up with one calculated event. And now you can optimize for that calculated event, which will help you to optimize all your campaigns. This is also can be said as an activity score. Think about this. Now you have got to know about this user way early in the funnel. And you can attach some kind of a score, which you can then pass it on back to the networks for the optimization purpose, or you can ask them to create lookalikes and do a lot of things around it. This methodology has helped and been proven and should be used. Some of the tips which I want to share at this point with you is: one, don't complicate stuff. Have 5 to 7 events, like critical events, which I just spoke about. Have some calculative methodology to gain meaningful one single score out of it. Use same convention all around, calculation, etc., whatever it is, across your BI team, your deep analysis, and for with your analytics team. Don't have different nomenclature; it will confuse everyone. And calculated events will definitely help you out. It is important to identify the potential user and create segments and use it wisely. With that, now since you have created events, you have data, now what do we do? It's been proved data-driven marketers running campaigns have significantly improved the retention rate and delivered better LTV for the company. This statistics talks about 30 days retention uplift in India. Look at this. From 2017 to 2018, we had 12%. 18 to 19, so far it has been 1% growth, which has also led to 14% 90 days ARPU. What does it mean? We all know that over a period of time, the data collected has been used meaningfully by and efficiently by the marketeers to improve retention and get better LTV. And this is the result. Tools enable you to have this data points. Advanced cohort and retention reports are the two tools which should be your best buddies. They help you to segment the users and optimize the campaign. And this has been proven. This is a retention report, or this is how your retention report should look like. Focus on the sources that delivers users with the highest retention and drop optimized sources that don't. My personal recommendation is just don't drop the network. Try to figure it out what went wrong there. It could be targeting, it could be communication, or it could, as simple as that, the creatives was not really communicating your product to them, and they just acquired the user. And as soon as that happens, drop off will happen. But you need to have a tap onto it. Keep on looking your retention reports regularly. Cohort is something very interesting. I'm sure you all understand that cohort is defined as a group of people that have common characteristics and are considered as a group to measure specific KPIs. Now, if suppose somebody starts today, somebody starts tomorrow, somebody starts after 15 days, and if you are trying to plot and look these people individually, it might not really give you the correct sense. The common misconception which is all around that analyzing data at the highest level with the widest scope will provide the most extensive overview. In reality, that's not true. The correct dimension is slicing and dicing and aligning data correctly is what helps to see what's working versus what's not. Most important, look at the data in the right context and what really matters. Let me give you an example. In e-commerce, we see high uninstall and reinstall. It is also a seasonality driven. Usually people during the sale, they install your app. They are with you till the time the sales are running. Once it is done, they drop off. It is a common phenomenon. And over a period of time, people have figured it out how to retain it. I'll speak about some of the case studies in coming slides. Similarly, you will have to find out that what is the best way to do it. A tip over here would be cohort retention curve that flattens is an indicator of stickiness, and that is what you need. So always optimize for the networks or the partners which are giving you these. This is important. No brainer, user experience. This has to be the most seamless. If your users are not happy, they will abandon you. Ensure when you're targeting them, which you must in across different locations, you should use a good deep linkings so that they are engaged. Their experience is seamless and they feel good about it. App to app, mobile to app, email to app, whatever it takes to engage, do that. But they should land up to the right page. They should land up and have a good experience. Let me cite another example of the user experience. There's a medical app which is actually targeting 40 plus age group users, or even sometimes 60 plus or 70 plus, because from that you can order medicines. Now, this particular app, the people thought that the actual users of this app might not be so much tech savvy. So, what they did, they created four simple buttons. One, call and order. Two, click the photo, send it across, and we will deliver. Three, the actual experience of the mobile. And four, will help you out. Simple steps works beautifully. That's what you have to think. What is your product and how you can fit the best? Re-engagement. Yeah, of course. You got the user, you are trying to retain it, you have done your cohorts right, you have got your data. When everything is in place, then what you need to do is re-engage your users. Use all possible channels to re-engage. This is your hard-earned user. You have invested your data, your time, your money onto it. So whatever it takes, email, push notification, paid retargeting campaign, use it, but use it wisely. To understand the impact of re-engagement particularly, at AppsFlyer, we analyzed 4.5 billion retargeting conversions over 2,000 apps globally. After doing that, we realized that there is definitely a different impact which we receive when you do re-engagement campaigns. Results are app retargeting drives 63% revenue uplift compared to 50% higher than the user acquisition bot would have delivered to you. You don't only get re-engaged or high LTV or retained user, but you also get a better revenue and ROI. Non-organic retention increased by around 20% in 2018, and day 30 retention of organic users increased only 5% in all verticals. What is more interesting to see in this slide is, and clearly indicates, that ARPUs under different category. Clearly, everything has gone up, except, and what surprised us was the entertainment as a category. This actually surprised, and when we did the deep dive, we realized that not always it's not always that your re-engagement campaigns will work. Sometimes it might backfire. And the reason for backfire could be, one, you are engaging with overexposure to the users, or you are showing irrelevant ads. And especially in entertainment, it holds true. Now let me give you a case study about Nykaa. Nykaa is the largest beauty brand in India and emerged as a market leader within a span of just 3 years, offering comprehensive selections of beauty products, and I'm sure you definitely know about them. They had a challenge from the beginning. Nykaa marketing team was driven and focused on acquiring new customers and retargeting uninstalled users. Acquiring customers is the first challenge, but re-engaging users to boost ROI is the true winning story which they wanted to focus. What they did was, most of the marketing or the marketeers would like to do is better use of the data for more effective audience segments and targeting. eMarketer did a survey that what is the most important requirement of a marketer. And it was very clear that the data should be used effectively via audiences when you are creating a segments. AppsFlyer also offers one of the enterprise grade tool, Audience Builder, which not only delivers very effective and advanced segmenting options, it also helps you to slice and dice data into various parts so that it makes meaningful information for you and accordingly you can target. Like I used audience tool and results were amazing. Excuse me. Nika recaptured its users by re-engaging an act, excuse me, which led to boost their ROI. While analyzing user behavior by please excuse, Nika built this dynamic segments and re-engaged the users. Various touch points along with the journey increased the retention rate by 55%. Nika not only achieved their targets, but they saw a high and increased ROI with all the engaged users. Have a look to this slide. This slide actually talks about how organic and non-organic data works. It clearly indicates when the marketers have been able to use data extensively, right targeting, and messaging, educated users are retained much longer. This slide also indicates that the effectiveness and the quality of the data and the campaigns which are data driven performs. With this, I hand over the baton to Ashwin, who will give you more interesting insights. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Himanshu. I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Now, before I jump into my slides, I would like to set some context. Himanshu has given us a lot of great insights about why retention is important and what to do about it. So what I will be doing is I will be spending a bit of time around how to improve retention with a couple of live use cases with real life data from millions of e-commerce users in Southeast Asia, right? So while Himanshu focused on the why and what of retention, I will be spending a little bit of time around the how aspect of it. Okay. Now, before we get into the retention part of it, here's a 30-second sales pitch of MoEngage for those of you who don't know. MoEngage is an intelligent customer engagement platform. Basically, you could analyze your user behavior and engage them across channels in one dashboard through MoEngage. So in other words, you could segment your users, analyze their behavior through funnels, cohorts, and other tools, and then directly improve retention by targeting those segments through automated campaigns across email, web, and push. So we have 130 plus customers across 35 countries, including some of the biggest mobile first brands in India, Oyo, Big Basket, Ghana, Wink, Ola, and more. To give you some sense of the scale that we operate in, we record billions of events per month. We send billions of messages, whether that's push notifications or email or SMS, and we profile and we process about 500 plus million active users every single month. And these are the customers who are actually sending these kind of messages and these kind of and engaging these kind of active users on our platform on a monthly basis. So we have been featured in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for mobile marketing platform twice in a row, and we are the only Asian company to be featured in there. All right. So that's my 30-second sales pitch. Now let's get back to talking about retention, folks. Now, before I actually, there you go. Now, before I actually dive deep into the use cases and data points, I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of retention point. I'm sure most of you are aware of it. For those of you who are not, a quick introduction. People also call it as the aha moment of your app, but basically it is a set of actions that separates users who are likely to retain from those who will churn, right? So in other words, what are the set of actions that a user performs on your app that maximizes their chance of retention? So let's understand this with a couple of examples that will make it easier. So here you go, right? So if you look at it, for Slack, it is 2,000 messages sent in a team, or for Facebook, it is basically if a user adds 10 friends in 7 days, there's a very high probability that the user is retained. For Zynga, it is if a user returns one day after the sign up, there's a very high chance that they're going to be retained. Now, one thing you need to understand is that these numbers seem very exact, but often that's not always the case, right? For example, I'm sure there are shows on Netflix which hook you in the first pilot episode itself. Or for Zynga, right? There will always be users who may come back 10 days later, but still get hooked onto it. So there will always be these users who don't confirm to this retention point. But what we are talking about is maximizing the odds of retaining, right? So that's really what retention point helps us for. And besides, when you identify this retention point, it gives you a very specific goal for you and your team to work towards. So your product team, marketing, engineering, support, sales, everyone is aligned towards this particular goal of driving users towards the retention point. Okay, so that's pretty much about the retention point. Now, I saw one question coming around how push notifications can impact retention. So we're going to cover that in some of my slides. So whoever asked that question, please do stick around. We're going to cover it. Now, before I move on to the next slide, which has, again, examples with some real world data, I'd like to highlight three things, right? So again, we can set some context here. One, you need to have an understanding of your baseline or overall retention rate. And Himanshu referenced this earlier. I mean, he showed you the retention curves and he showed you the importance of understanding your retention curves. And having this baseline is very important, right? Because one, it will tell you what you should improve on. And second, it will also help you identify where the maximum drop-offs are happening for your app, right? I mean, is it happening on day 0 or day 5 or day 7, etc.? So that's point one. Point two is based on this baseline retention rate, you need to make some hypothesis about why users are dropping off. And these hypotheses gives you a direction, right? And then you can use data to prove or disprove your hypothesis. There's so much data available that if you jump directly into it without having a set of hypotheses to guide you, then you will probably get lost in the data, right? So for example, in the following slides, we have a couple of hypotheses and we are going to test that. So our hypothesis is users need to complete one transaction in 7 days, or users need to do at least 6 sessions on the app on day 0. And remember, this is all e-commerce data, right? So we're going to look at transactions and sessions. And point three, I'm assuming that most of you have at least a basic version of some kind of analytics set up for your app, at least a free version of Google Analytics. The following slides, the slides that I'm going to show you, it will highlight how we have analyzed millions of data points from e-commerce users in Southeast Asia, and we used a sophisticated tool like MoEngage for it. But nevertheless, even if you have like a minimum version of an analytic tool, that's a minimum prerequisite, right? So you need to have some kind of an analytic tool for you to actually identify your retention point. Great. So with those, let's jump right into it. Now, what are we showing here? Now here we are showcasing a chart that groups day cohorts in the horizontal axis and the number of transactions on the vertical axis, right? So here's your horizontal and here's your vertical axis, right? So remember, our original hypothesis was that a user should do at least one transaction in 7 days, right? And we thought that was the retention point. And this graph seems to support that. So you can see that the retention rates for day 1 to day 7 cohort who do at least one transaction is 92%. However, there's a couple of other numbers, right? There's a certain group here which has 100% retention, right? There's certain groups which have 94, 97, or even 99% retention. Now you need to be a little careful about this, right? For example, if I look at day 0 cohort, the retention rate for people within day 0 cohort and who do 3 transactions is almost at 100%. Now, does it mean you should revise your hypothesis to say, guess what, my new retention point is to drive users to do three transactions on day zero? The answer is not really, right? I mean, think about it. If you are an e-commerce app, how many users actually do three transactions on day zero, right? I'm guessing it's a very small, tiny fraction of your day zero cohort. While this particular cohort may have had good reasons to perform three transactions on day zero, it doesn't really mean that you should drive all the other users towards towards that point of three transactions on day zero. So be a little careful while reading these charts and balance it out with how large a particular cohort is. Now, for instance, if you look at day zero cohort, and people who do one transaction in that cohort, now that seems more likely, right? I mean, a lot of people, see some kind of discount offer or see some kind of advertisement for your app. They're motivated to download your app to shop for a particular product category or whatever. So it's likely that there's a significant percentage of users who download your app and do one transaction on day zero. So basically here, while we started out with the original hypothesis says that users should do at least one transaction in 7 days and the retention rate for that is 92%, it may be better to get them to do one transaction on day zero itself and have a 96% retention, right? So that's what this graph talks about. Now let's move on to the next one. So the other hypothesis that we had was about sessions, right? So remember we said that a user should do at least 6 sessions on day zero to maximize retention, right? That was our hypothesis. So here we are showing a chart that again groups day cohorts in the horizontal axis and the number of sessions on the vertical axis. And this graph seems to disprove that hypothesis, right? So if you look at the retention rate for day zero cohort and who do 5+ transactions, 5+ sessions, you can see that the retention rate is pretty low at 60%. So the sweet spot seems to be at 3 to 5, really 3 to 4 sessions actually on day zero. And you can also see that 3+ sessions on day 1 to day 7 cohort it actually increases your retention rate quite dramatically. So again, need to be a little careful of how you see these graphs, because there are certain fields here which show higher retention rate. Like for example, there's 87% retention for people on day zero cohort and who do not open your app at all. Obviously that's not what you want to aim for. So again, in summary, so the chart here disproves our hypothesis that a user should do at least 6 sessions on day zero. So now we now have a new insight into this, which like 3 to 4 sessions on day zero seems to be the sweet spot. And if users open my app more than that, it's not really good, right? So this is just kind of like an example of one use case of how you can look at different events and different actions that a user can take on your app to try and understand what is really the sweet spot from a retention perspective. Now, let's move on to the next one, right? Now, the last two charts focused on user actions like transaction or opening the app. Then we realized, hey, why don't we look at our frequency of communication and see if it has any impact on retention, right? And here's what we did was, coming back to the question about push notification. So here we said the horizontal axis again has day group cohorts, and the vertical axis highlights the number of push notifications received by each cohort and the retention rate. So basically what we are trying to find out is how many push notifications are too many or too less. Now here you see a very clear trend, right? So you notice day zero cohort here, and the sweet spot seems to be between 3 to 5 notification. And in fact, there's a dramatic drop in retention for less than 3 notifications and more than 5 notifications, right? Again, notice D1 to D7 cohort, right? There is a dramatic improvement in retention rate when the user receives 7 push notifications. So really, the summary of here or the key takeaway here is make your hypothesis. It could be sessions, it could be, add to cart, it could be push notification frequency, it could be transactions. If you're running a music app, it could be, did the users are creating a playlist. So basically create multiple hypotheses and really look into your data, right? Create your cohorts, look at all of this and really try to understand what is that sweet spot, right? What are the actions that seems to correlate with higher retention? So there you go. So this is, from our hypothesis and from the user from the live data that we saw, this seems to be the aha moment of our app, right? It's 1+ transaction, brings the uninstall rate. If it's 3+, it's close to 0. Otherwise, it's at around 92%. 3+ sessions, higher retention rate. 3 to 5 notifications, anywhere between day 0 to day 7, it improves retention rate dramatically. Again, think through it, make your hypothesis. For example, if you have a music streaming app, you could hypothesize that your retention point could be when a user listens to 4 songs and creates a playlist, right? So you could go with that hypothesis and really figure out if that is true. And if it is not true, what's data telling you, right? Now that you have some introduction on how to identify your retention point, let's talk about how to drive users towards that retention point, right? So I'm going to take the example of Tokopedia, which is one of our customers. Tokopedia is one of the largest e-commerce companies in Southeast Asia. They are a SoftBank-backed company. I think valued at almost $10 billion now. They have more than 80 million monthly active users, so it's really a big deal, right? Now, here's really the challenge that they were facing a couple of years ago, right? So they looked at it, and they looked at all the data. They had their baseline retention graphs. The product managers, growth marketers, they all actually went through the baseline curves and figured out in the first month, basically between day 0 and day 30, 58% of people were churning, right? They were just uninstalling the app. And that was really a huge number, right? I mean, how do we increase that number? Because you're spending money to capture these users, and if they're not doing any transaction and uninstalling the app within the first 30 days, that's not good, right? So that was really the challenge. So what the product managers and growth marketers at Tokopedia did was they looked at their overall churn rate, they looked at the retention rate, they formed a few hypotheses, they mapped a customer journey that runs through all the user actions that could lead towards the retention point. And then they basically drew a funnel which identified drop-offs at each stage of the funnel, right? So basically for them, their retention point or the North Star metric or the final goal was, how do I get people to their first purchase, right? That was really the North Star metric. Now to get to that, they mapped out a few steps, right? So people need to install the app, from installation to registration, registration to add to cart to first purchase, and then obviously they wanted their users to come back and purchase more. Now once they identified this map or the customer journey and this funnel, what they did was they utilized multiple channels such as push, email, SMS, and retargeting. So you can see a sample of how they actually built an automated workflow using MoEngage. So they set rules about when to trigger a particular push notification or an email or an SMS, and how many times to trigger those communications. So for example, when a user completed a certain action, right? So for example, when a user registered, then the next step in the journey was to get them to add to cart, right? So and you can see that they've set rules which says once the user registers, how do I automatically push them towards the next step, which is add to cart? And if they don't complete that step, how do I nudge them back into the cycle, right? So the key here is to design a user journey map and use multiple channels intelligently to make sure that you communicate at the exact moment with the exact message to nudge users towards the next step in their journey towards the retention point, right? So really use multiple channels. Don't just rely on one. Again, coming back to the earlier question about push notifications and how it improves user retention. Obviously push notification is a great channel. There's a lot of statistics which show that it is better than email and better than SMS and all of that stuff. But you've got to intelligently use push notifications along with other channels to really maximize your chances of retention. Now, once they did this, here's the result, right? So there was a dramatic improvement in their retention rate, like 60% improvement in the first month user retention on the app, 20% uplift in first conversion transactions by new users on the app. So really that's pretty much it, folks, from my side. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope this was useful. We would be happy to take any questions. I'm going to pass it on to Ankita, to talk about any questions that we may have received.
Thanks a lot, Ashwin and Himanshu. That was a really great presentation, captivating insights, best practices, and a very fascinating case studies. Okay, thank you,
From both
guys.
of
We
you.
have some interesting questions that came in today. Let's try and cover as many as possible. First question is for Himanshu. It is, how do you think app virality helps in better retention?
Great, good question. So app virality, or we also call it K factor, wherein we say that if somebody is referring or giving recommendation of your app to its friend or somebody, does it actually helps in retention? Yes, it does, because there is a belief, there is definitely a person who has recommended this app. Now, this K factor can actually be spoken as, there's a formula for it. Say K, when number of invites sent multiplied by the conversions it has yield, or the signups it has yield, can actually lead to tell you about the K factor or the virality factor. If the K factor is good, that means a lot of people are recommending your app. If they are recommending your app, it also means that the recommended apps definitely has a better users coming into the funnel. Better user coming into the funnel will lead to the better retention. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks so much, Himanshu. Another question for you. Can you give some pointers on stickiness of the users?
Okay, sure. So the stickiness of the users is defined, or let me just explain it to you, when the people are habitual of using your app. Now think about this, and if we look around, there are a lot of companies which have started amalgamating all the different services into one app. Idea is that if you don't use one service, you will definitely use second, third, or the fourth services. This actually increases the DAU and the MAU of your apps. If I have to define daily active users divided by monthly active users, if they are more than 50%, you're boom. You actually are getting an habitual daily users who try to use your apps on a daily basis. More the stickiness, better the retention, better the ROI. I hope I've answered.
Got it. Thanks, Himanshu. I think there are a couple of questions for me. I think one is, how does A/B testing help to improve retention? I think that's a great question. I mean, if you look at the entire analysis that I showed, it's actually an exercise in correlation. So you're absolutely right. It does not automatically mean causation, right? So I would actually recommend two things. So once you think you have identified your retention point, I would strongly recommend that you go back, create another behavioral cohort. Like, for example, if your hypothesis is users who have done 3 sessions on day 0, and if that is your retention point, go back and create a cohort for that particular user set, and then chart the retention rate for this particular group, right? So which means um, and then you compare this retention rate with your baseline retention rate, right? So remember, ideally, I said first step in this process, you should have a baseline retention rate. So if you compare your new retention rate with your baseline retention rate, it should ideally be higher. So that is one. The second is to actually A/B test your UI and communication, right? So say you have a music app and you think your retention point is user creates a playlist in 3 days, right? Let's just assume. But then test it out, right? So for example, suggest users to save songs they are listening to and say, hey, why don't you save this in a playlist, right? So create a test around that, or test it out saying making the playlist creation CTA more prominent. So really test these out, right? So test your communication, test your UI UX to really make sure that you have nailed down the retention point, so that you don't just rely on the correlation part of it, but also look at the causation part of it. So it takes a few tries. You're not going to get it right for the first time. um, but I think once you identify the retention point and verify it, then have your team razor focused on it. I think that's really the key around the A/B testing part of it. um, I think another question is around which tool was used to measure the cohort reports that you showed. I think Himanshu, showcased the AppsFlyer tool for the cohorts, which showed the sources. While the cohort report that I showed was basically we used MoEngage tool to get those data points, and then we charted some of the cohorts through the tool, and we also connected Tableau to the MoEngage tool to display some visualizations as well. So, but basically most of the number crunching was done in the MoEngage tool itself. I think there is one more question. It's mostly around, which is more important, user retention or app retention, and how both are different. I mean, I'm not really sure if there's a real differentiation around it. I mean, end of the day, you need to define what your retention. You need to define what retention means for you. Um, in the charts that I showed, I've assumed basically app retention, right? So basically, I've not looked at user activity. I've basically said that if the user does not uninstall the app over 90 days, then I considered it as retention. That's the assumption I made when I showed the graphs. But you need to define what retention means for you, right? So if you say that retention is actually not somebody who just keeps the app, but somebody who actually does, let's say, 4 sessions on the 4th week of installing the app, well, that's your retention, right? So you need to define what retention means for you, and then plot your graphs and charts and cohorts, and really try to understand the retention point. I think we have more questions coming in, but I think we are kind of running out of time. So what we can do is, we'll take a look at these questions and we'll try and answer them over email, either Himanshu or I. And then we're going to get back to you on that. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Ankita.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you for that excellent questions. And that also brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you again, Himanshu and Ashwin, for this amazing webinar and for sharing this with us. More importantly, thank you for sharing your knowledge about this crucial aspect of mobile app marketing. To the folks who are listening in, big thank you for staying with us and being active all through the webinar. We will be sharing a recording of this webinar in the coming days, so stay tuned to MoEngage and have a great day ahead.